Hi everybody, this is Linda. Hope y'all have had a wonderful week and you're going to have a wonderful weekend. But since we're all together, let's talk houseplants. We're going to talk about climbing plants, aroids, and what they need to climb on and what are the best things for them to climb on to get their biggest leaves, their biggest production, beautiful plant. I have 3 examples that I want to show you what you can use for them to climb on. I'm going to show you just 2 plants that everybody has that probably they don't realize that they like to climb too. Now the one behind me in this green screen picture is a wax plant or a Hoya, and believe it or not, it likes to climb too. Now most people put it in a hanging basket. I like my plants to cascade, and so I'm gonna let her cascade. And but then Jamie, if you'll bring me one of the plants and I'll show that. This
Grandma.
What?
Go.
We had to take off the green screen because it wouldn't show the plant. Alright, this is what everybody has. It's a philodendron. It's the heart-shaped leaf. And believe it or not, it likes to climb too. And then we've got the other plant is a Pothos. And it loves to climb. And this plant, I'm going to show you some pictures to show you how it likes to climb and what it looks like when it's climbing. Okay, this is the Pothos. And as you can see here, that first picture on the left, it's climbing a moss pole. And this one here, you can see the moss pole a little bit. And if you'll notice down here in the bottom, the leaves are a little bit small. If I can find my cursor, I can show you. There we go. Okay. See these leaves, how small they are? Well, when you get up here, they get larger. And the more they grow, the larger they get. That's because they love to climb. They are climbers in the wild. And they start off on the floor of the jungle, and when they find a tree, they start climbing up it. Now, I like mine to be like the 2 on the right, the dark green and the real light green. I like that kind of cascading. However, I love the climbing too, but I don't have any room for a climber. And so, since I love cascading plants, that's the way I'm going to do mine. There's something I want to show you while I've got these up. See, these 2 pothos are right together. What you can do, and I don't know if that's what this person is doing, but what you can do, say you've got 2 pothos, and one of them looks kind of thin, and one of them is pretty thick and has long runners. Well, what you can do is set them close to one another. Let this one long one reach over into the pot and lay on the ground, on the soil. And you see these roots right here? They will root into this soil in this pot, and when you see new growth coming out of this stem, then you just cut it off wherever you want to cut it off. And that's how you can easily refresh a pot that's gotten kind of sparse. And if you want to refresh just the one pot, then cut it off right here. These 2 little roots, stick them down in the soil, keep the soil moist, and do that with all of these. You can cut them off up to here. New ones will come out, and it'll thicken it up real good. And then once you got it as thick as you like it, then you can start letting it trail. This is how thick I like mine. So I do a lot of that cutting and sticking in the soil so it will grow thicker. Now, I want to show you some ways to make these plants grow thicker, bigger leaves, just a much more lush plant. There are 3 things that you need to put them on to grow up, to climb up. Pick out which one you want. It doesn't matter. I'm going to tell you the pros and cons of each one, and you can choose which one you want to put in your plant. Now, my split leaf philodendron, let me show you that. My split leaf philodendron, I have this arbor. It's metal. It's been in there for probably 10 years or more. And I just recently, in the last few weeks, because it had grown way up past the top of this arbor, but it had gotten long and leggy. Because while I was sick, I couldn't take care of it. And the poor thing, as hardy as it is, it was really looking bad. So we cut it off in various places, cut it off, stuck it down in the soil. You can see all of these stems here. That was where we cut it off. We cut it off and put it down in the soil. They have rooted, and here's a new leaf. 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 Everywhere a new leaf. So now what I've got to do, once they have taken off real well, now I've got to pull these close to this arbor and attach them to the arbor so that it doesn't spread out so far. It'll look like a well-controlled plant, and I'll show you what I mean in a minute. Now, if you look behind this guy and see how big and luscious they are, well, that's because he has made these moss poles. And I'm going to let him show you how to make them real quick, but then I'm going to tell you the bad part of making moss poles. But this is how they will grow for you if you have a moss pole, the proper light and the proper humidity and the proper food. All right, let's let him tell you.
So now that we know why I love using moss poles, let's talk about what we actually need to produce one of those. First things first, we need sphagnum moss. I use a premium quality sphagnum moss from New Zealand. I buy it at Bunnings, which is just a local garden store. More than just a garden store, but pretty much a go-to store for everything here in Australia. I make sure that the moss that I purchase is sustainably harvested. Sphagnum moss in itself is a renewable source, so it can be sustainably harvested. Don't get it confused with peat moss. Peat moss is technically the same as sphagnum moss, but it has been decomposing for thousands of years. So you cannot sustainably harvest peat moss, but you can sustainably harvest sphagnum moss. This pack of moss is 500 grams, and I'll be able to make 6 of my moss poles out of them. All my moss poles are 90 centimeters long and 6 centimeters in diameter, so that would equate to around about 90 grams of dried moss per moss pole. We need the wire mesh, so I use a coated wire mesh, and make sure that it's coated wire and not plastic. A plastic pole just won't have enough structural integrity to actually hold up by itself. It will start being floppy or tilt, especially once you start having large leaves growing on these moss poles. It's really important that we have structural integrity. I also get my wire mesh from Bunnings, and the grid in itself is, I believe, 12 millimeters times 12 millimeters. We need a few cable ties just to tie it all together, and we'll need a wire cutter to cut through the wire. So let's get started.
Before we goes on, I want to explain something to you. All that stuff is expensive, and I'll show you the prices after his video. It's expensive, but if you're going to do 6 poles, I guess it's not all that expensive. But I would only do 1 pole for my split leaf philodendron, and I'm sure all of you, if you wanted to do it, would do 1 plant. So it's very expensive, and plus that wire mesh he's using is very hard to cut, and it hurts. Jamie can attest to that. It hurts. So I'm going to show you an alternate way of doing it. And it's very laborious work, and it takes a good while, over an hour, to make just 1. And so let him continue to tell you about this.
Right, I'll start off with wetting my moss. When you construct the moss pole, it's just so much easier to wet the moss first. So I'll just take a little bit of it. And normally when I make moss poles, I'll just always make them in bulk. So I always make 6 at a time using exactly 1 packet. Today I'll just make 1, but it's so much easier to just make them in bulk. It's the same amount of effort, it's the same amount of mess, but you end up with 6 moss poles. If you just make a moss pole when you need one, you'll probably procrastinate and you won't actually end up making the moss pole.
I disagree. It's not the same amount of effort. It's like I said, it's very laborious to take those mesh wires and cut them. It's very painful when they stick you in the hand. It takes a good while to cut each and every wire. So I don't think that he was right there.
So that way I always have moss poles handy. So if a plant needs an extension, if a plant needs a moss pole, or anything else, I'll always have one handy, and I don't need to, it kind of stops me from not doing the plant maintenance that my plant probably wants. So I just pop the moss in this bucket full of water, just so it can soak up a little bit of water. We want the moss to be moist, we don't necessarily want it to be wet. So I'll just get it to soak up as much of the water as it can. Full, then I make sure I drain all excess water out of it, and I'll fluff up the moss a little bit as well. I don't want the moss inside the moss pole to be too dense. I want it to be nice and fluffy. Alright, so I will just speed that up for you guys. Alrighty, so I've got nice fluffy moist moss over here. Okay. Next thing, I'm gonna cut the wire. So I always use the same size moss pole. It just makes it so much easier when you later on try and extend moss poles. They're just all the same size, so they all fit each other. I tried a few different diameters, and I noticed that around 6 centimeter diameter is perfect. I think 6 centimeters is a good balance between being skinny enough to be nice and light, but thick enough to actually contain enough moss to hold the moisture. So 6 centimeters with my grid equates to around 15 squares. So I'll just go ahead and start chopping it. Just kidding, I prepared it earlier for you, so you don't need to watch me. After I chop it, I'll take these little pliers and I'll just bend all of the sharp edges inwards to make sure that these sharp edges won't later on rip any of the leaves once the plant starts growing on it. And now I can just start filling it with moss. I do not fill the bottom maybe 10 centimeters or so of the actual moss pile, because that part will later on be inside the pot. So I fill that with potting medium once I pot it up later on. You don't want it to be super dense, you want it to be aerated. That will really help prevent mold, I believe. Aeration is really important if you don't want any mold. I do believe the quality of the moss in itself is important as well. I personally haven't had any mold issues, but I've had people reach out to me. I believe it could be based on the moss in itself, or it could be that you're packing it too tight and keeping it too wet, and ultimately you'll start seeing mold form. So I would give it a 6 out of 10 when it comes to the density of the moss within the pole. So I'm pretty happy with that. So I'll start just shaping it up like a little burrito. Beautiful. And I'll start with a cable tie, and I always just cable tie the middle together first. That way it will make everything else much easier.
Okay, now the thing with him, since he made this video, a lot of people have come out and said that there is bacteria buildup, there is mold, and there is stench. And the other thing about a moss pole is that you have to keep it moist. And if you pack it too tight, that's where you get your bacteria and your mold and your stench. If you pack it too loosely, it dries out really quickly. You got to figure out how much. But with the moss pole, you have to moisten it a couple times a day, depending on how dry your house is, especially in the wintertime. That's when you really got to work. And then when you water it from the top of the pole, and let it go down into the moss, and it just goes all around into the moss and down into the dirt around the plant. And the plant is going to put its roots, its runners, into the moss pole and become one with the moss pole. The moss pole will be sort of like an extension of the pot. And if you put fertilizer in your water, then that moss pole is not only going to have water, it's going to have food for the plant. And all of those aerial roots, say from the split-leaf philodendron, for instance, all those aerial roots will go into that moss pole, and those roots will stay in there. And it's going to produce more food and water to have more leaves, more production. So that is the thing about a moss pole. It's a ton of work. And it's a ton of work to make it. And you notice he had to turn each and every wire. Well, first he had to clip each and every wire. It ain't clipping a whole wild bunch. Each and every wire all the way up on both sides. Then you got to go back and bend it. That's just too much work for me. So let me show you how much this stuff cost, and then we'll get to the alternative. On Amazon, the sphagnum moss is $40.51 for 1 pound. And I don't know how many poles that makes. And then you've got to buy the wire. I don't know, I think it's less than $20. And if you don't have a good wire cutter, then you got to have wire cutters. And then you got to have the zip ties. So we're looking at approximately $60 to make your pole. Now, I think that somebody else had a good alternative. She said use this plastic mesh. And what you're going to do is when you cut it to size that you need, lay a metal stake like tomatoes climb up on. Lay it in there and then pack it with your moss and then bring it up and attach it like he was doing with your zip ties. And that way your metal pole is going to carry all the weight of the heavy split-leaf philodendron or whatever plant you've got. And yet this plastic does the same thing as the wires, and this is easy to cut. Another alternative is to purchase these already made. Now, you can buy them on Amazon, but they all have right here they've got wooden stakes. And it looks like to me they're white pine. That means if they are white pine, that means they will rot the first year. And then you've got a mess. You don't have anything. This I like because this sits down in the bottom of your pot. You can eat, they've even got holes here that you can even screw them into your pot. And then this is sturdy. And then they've got where you can add to it or make it shorter or longer. And it shows how it connects to if you need a taller pole, and also how to feed it. So this is expensive. It's $32.99 for one pole. So let me show you now cheaper, almost zero cost. It depends on if you have the scrap lumber in your house, at your house. I'm going to show you this video.
Martin here at Logie's Greenhouses, and today we're going to be talking about how to take small plants, particularly philodendrons or those in that family, and turn them into beautiful large specimens. So within the grouping of philodendrons, the epipremnum give the most spectacular display. And the nature of many of these climbing philodendrons or climbing aroids is that they start out in the jungle floor or low down, and they run along the ground and they hit something and they run up. And when they do that, they start to go from juvenile to mature. And here we have a plant of Cebu blue that has been planted in a pot like so, and it's a young plant like this. This plant here is about a year old in the greenhouses. And it's been put on a board, and the plant started to climb. It's a very small stem right here, and it started to climb. Here's two leads on it. This one here was the one that was probably more aggressive, and it's climbed up, and as it climbed, the leaves got larger and the stems got thicker until we get up to the top where you start to see the mature forked leaves on it. And many of our philodendrons or pothos or epipremnums will actually do that if you give them a chance. It's quite simple. You just need some way to make them go vertical or encourage them to go vertical. And generally what we'll do is we will start out with a pot, and you can start out with something. This is a 6-inch, so we're going to use that. We have a piece of board here. This is cedar. So one of the issues in doing this kind of display and growth pattern is you've got wood in soil, and there's always the problem of over time it actually decomposing. This is a very slow decomposing wood. And so what we're going to do is we're going to actually plant our board first and put it right in the middle of this pot. We're going to get it down as far as.
Okay, so that's what you can use. That's what you can use for letting your plants grow up, because it's cheap. And according to him, and he's with Logie Nurseries, he said what really makes those leaves grow big is not so much what they're growing up on, it's that they're growing up, climbing. That's their nature. And so if you're giving it something to climb on, then it will get big. So your choices are, I had my arbor already years ago. I had it on hand. I wasn't using it. It was just in a closet somewhere. So I said, oh, bright idea. You can use an arbor if you have one. You can use a piece of cedar wood, if you've built a cedar privacy fence and you got some left over, use that. You can buy it very cheap, 6 or 8 foot piece of wood for $4 and something. So make it as tall as you want that plant to grow. Or you can go real expensive Cadillac version and get the moss pole. A lot of work. Got to keep it watered. You got to put up with the bacteria, the mold, and the smell. But the plants love it. But I don't know that there will be a whole lot of difference, because long time ago, back in the 90s, 1990 something, we lived in East Tennessee, and we had a great big house, and the living room had a 20-foot ceiling, cathedral ceiling. For my birthday, my husband brought home 2 17-foot plants. One was a pothos, and I'm not kidding you, that the leaves on that plant was every bit of 18 inches wide. And then one was a split-leaf philodendron, and those leaves were every bit of 2 foot wide. And they were growing on just stick, you know, the wood that I told you about. So that's why it's important that you give it the right sunlight or bright light, the right water, and the right fertilizer. Now, since I've been fertilizing my split-leaf philodendron with worm castings just a few weeks, I've got that many new leaves already. Split leaves are very fast growers, and if you're making them happy, they'll put out leaves one right after the other like a rabbit. They reproduce quickly, so quickly that you're going to have to cut off the tops unless you have a conservatory to put it in. But you'll have to cut off the tops and stick them down in the dirt so that you'll thicken up your plant, or give it to somebody as a gift. But they do grow pretty quick. Down in Florida, I've seen them growing up trees in people's yards, and their leaves are humongous. I mean, just huge. So that is your choice on how to make your plants big and luscious. Any one of those 3 is perfectly fine. You'll get a good plant. You've seen mine. Let me show it to you again. You've seen mine has these great big leaves, and then it has the little leaves. Well, these aren't mature yet because these are new. All these are new from when I cut it back. These are the old ones that were left before I cut it. So you're going to get, even if you use the metal arbor is the way I like, because I don't have to worry about, the wood is rotted now after 2 or 3 years, and I'm going to have to change it. And oh my goodness, how you going to change it with this plant hooked to it? This, I just tie it to the pole periodically where these bars go across, and it's fine. So just choose which one you want. Cost, work, smell, bacteria, mold. You never should be around mold. And just easy going. You can use anything for your plant to climb up. Get you a stick, you know, any stick, bamboo, stick out in the yard. Problem with the stick out in the yard is going to have bugs on it, but you can even do that. I have done that. I didn't have a stick. I went out in the yard and I used that. What I did was I just sprayed it with what I use in the garden for bugs. I sprayed it good for that. But you can, the problem with that is it rots real fast. But it just was to hold me until I could get a piece of wood. So that is about it with moss pole, how to let your plant climb. There are so many plants that love to climb, and some that you probably don't realize, like this wax plant behind me, and like the philodendron. A lot of people don't know they like to have a climb. I had one back in 1969. I had one, a green philodendron like I showed you. And it climbed up the pole. The pole wasn't very big, about 2 foot tall. And then it kept going and going and going. So I just took, you know, taped it to the wall, and then it went up across the ceiling. And my sister still talks about this, but she was just a little teeny girl when this happened, maybe 2 years old, but she remembers it well. I had that thing growing all around the living room and the room next to the living room, all around that, and then back again. I just wanted to see how far it would grow, but I don't like doing that because it makes them long and leggy and not too pretty. I like mine to be about 18 inches long, and then I start cutting it back. But the pothos, I let it get up to the, you know, to cascade 18 inches long. But the split leaf philodendron, I'll let it get up to the top of the pole, and then I'll start cutting that back. All right, there you have it. I hope this helped you. I'm trying to think, was there something else I needed to tell you? But I don't think so. If I do, oh well. You can email me and ask me. Okay, guys. Well, I hope you have a wonderful weekend. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.